Epic Games and Unreal Engine now stand as pillars of the modern gaming industry, powering countless titles across genres and platforms. But this technological juggernaut traces its lineage back to a single-player first-person shooter released in 1998, Unreal. Before the tournaments, before the engine became synonymous with multi-platform development, there was simply Unreal, a game that dared to challenge the dominance of id Software on the technical front, and one built to transport players to a new world. It's called Unreal because it is, they said, and honestly, they weren't wrong. Unreal was a true visual powerhouse, a game that pushed the limits of PC hardware circa 1998. It was the most impressive game of the year, bar none. It delivered sprawling, meticulously crafted environments drenched in atmosphere, showcasing what was possible when art direction met raw rendering muscle. Epic capitalized on this success, building new games atop its technology and gradually shifting the spotlight from the games themselves to the engine beneath it. Over time, Unreal became less about the shooter Unreal and more about the engine Unreal, a name that would define an entire generation of game development. Yet even as the industry moved forward, the community never let that original Unreal fade. Modders and fans alike kept it alive with patches, enhancements, and updates that extended its lifespan well beyond the original release. And now, thanks to RTX Remix and dedication of that same community, we have something new. Unreal RTX, a fully path-traced reimagining of the original Unreal. It's a fascinating project and one that deserves a closer look. Today, we're going to be diving into this project, but also, I want to take you back to 1998 to explore why Unreal's visuals were such a revelation in the first place. It begins with a small company known as Epic MegaGames, a PC developer known for games such as Jazz Jackrabbit, Joe of the Jungle, and the like. Jazz Jackrabbit was especially important with its super high frame rate and colorful graphics. Side-scrolling games on the PC were actually not easy to execute back then. Coming from the world of consoles, platforming games almost universally just ran at 60 frames per second, as console hardware had special silicon designed to accelerate tile map scrolling. The PC, with its frame buffer setup, had no such option, and as such, scrolling a screen like this was a lot slower and required more work from the programming side. Most PC platformer games looked more like, say, Hocus Pocus here, scrolling at a very sluggish frame rate. But then Epic MegaGames comes along with Jazz Jackrabbit running at a smooth 70 frames per second, even on a 486. This is the game that put them on my radar, and from here I started paying attention to whatever they were going to do next. Not long after, in 1995, development began on what would become known as Unreal. It was created through a partnership between Epic MegaGames and Digital Extremes. The idea: a sprawling first-person shooter with large-scale levels, advanced AI behavior, and unusual multifunction weapons. The success of games like Doom and then Quake absolutely changed the face of PC gaming during this time, and everyone wanted a bite. Many developers opted to license id Software's Quake engine and build on that. But Epic wanted to do something that could compete with id, but on its own terms. This idea of working with other studios to bring games to the market proved beneficial, bolstering Epic's business momentum as Unreal took shape. During the development of Unreal, Epic would release two other very well-received titles: Firefight from 1996, co-developed with the Polish studio Chaosworks, and Seventh Legion, a real-time strategy game created in part with Vision Software from Africa. Magazine ads from the time also referenced two other games, Age of Wonders and Curly's Adventure. Age of Wonders did eventually ship after Unreal, but Curly's Adventure, a point-and-click adventure game, never saw the light of day outside of this leaked build. Thankfully, Firefight and Seventh Legion helped keep Epic MegaGames' name visible and relevant, but make no mistake, it was the looming arrival of Unreal that truly captured people's attention. Yes, this is an actual PC game screenshot. Hyperbolic headlines such as this dominated magazine covers in the mid-90s, dazzling readers with visuals that truly felt ahead of their time. I remember pining over every shot, but little did I know when the game would finally launch in 1998, it would look nothing like these early screenshots. Fortunately, thanks to a treasure trove of prototypes, alphas, betas, and information available online, we can trace Unreal's turbulent development, and it's full of surprises. Take this 1995 prototype for instance. This was a very early time. This is pre-Quake, by the way. But here we have this demo with full 3D levels featuring crude specular lighting across flat surfaces, a technique most games wouldn't even think of attempting until many years later. It was very basic still, but the building blocks were there. By 1997, the engine had evolved significantly, pivoting to 3D acceleration. It ran smoothly on a Voodoo 2, but the game itself was still wildly different than what would ship. This is the version that would often be used for screenshots in magazines. Maps, weapons, enemies, almost everything was unfinished or unrecognizable. Now, some maps did survive into the final release, but they were all heavily reworked. What I like about these pre-release builds is that they kind of reveal some of the things that Epic was attempting from a technology standpoint. Like here, if you switch to the software renderer, there's more lost tech to be unearthed. In the final game, when you dive into water, for instance, the screen takes on this sort of glowing look to indicate that you're underwater, but it doesn't really do much else than that. But in the original software renderer, you get these underwater warbling effects that distort textures. It looks really cool and similar to what Quake would do, but even more advanced. There's also unique water surface textures and sky systems in play, not to mention a massive library of music tracks that never made it into the final game. These early builds offer a rare glimpse into Unreal's pre-release identity and kind of help explain why the game felt so different from the one hyped in magazines. They were just constantly evolving things, trying to figure out what worked. It's clear that the game that did ship was created in a very short period of time compared to everything before it. But it wouldn't have been possible without those building blocks. When I finally got my hands on the game in 1998 though, it truly did blow me away. I remember the first time I walked out into this huge open area, staring at the sky above before wandering over to this cliffside where a waterfall could be seen pouring into a chasm. It was a powerful moment. There just hadn't been a game like this that combined such a vast sense of scale with this level of detail. As I continued my adventure through the world of Unreal, it's clear that the core gameplay here couldn't quite match up to what id Software had done, but the level designs and encounters were still highly engaging, and the visuals definitely helped make it all work. Those visuals were ultimately the game's biggest selling point, so much so that the 4 variants sold in North America simply used a screenshot of the game as the cover art for the CD case. That's how impressive these visuals were in 1998. Now at launch, Unreal supported just 3 rendering paths: Glide, the proprietary API for 3dfx Voodoo cards, PowerSGL, used by PowerVR hardware, and software rendering. That's right, Direct3D and OpenGL were not available at the time. Epic did eventually patch them in, but those original renderers never quite matched what was possible with Glide, which was clearly the target, because when paired with a compatible 3dfx card, Unreal delivered unbelievable visuals. Full RGB textures in 16-bit color with vibrant light maps all blended with precision, combined with a color palette that outshone the far more limited lighting of something like Quake 2. Unreal's environments weren't just impressive, they were emotionally resonant, bathed in hues that really brought it all to life. Epic also introduced a clever solution for enhancing its near-field detail textures. That is, they placed secondary texture layers that applied to the main textures but only in close range, which would help simulate fine-grained features like scratches in stone, wear on metal, or wood grain. It was a subtle trick, but one that significantly boosted the perceived fidelity of the game. Unreal also pushed boundaries by simulating atmospheric effects that were barely feasible at the time. For instance, volumetric fog. Most games use fog to simply mask geometry transitions at a distance, right? But Unreal allowed you to see all across the level. Instead, they developed this system that allows fog to linger in pockets, enhancing mood and immersion around the player. In addition, Unreal features these circular light crowns. Basically, bright spotlights produce lens flares that faded naturally as the light was occluded from view, lending a distinctly filmic quality to the visuals. I even recall reading what must have been a .plan file from Tim Sweeney back in the day. If I remember correctly, he got this idea from walking home at night in the rain, observing how lights behaved in this scenario. Then there was the fluid material system for animated surfaces and torches. Both water and fire alike exhibit a level of motion fluidity and realism that was unheard of in first-person shooters at the time, especially in the pre-pixel shader era. Compared to Quake's transparent but ultimately very simple water effects, Unreal's fluids looked astonishingly lifelike. Naturally, sky rendering was another standout. Multi-textured skies scrolled smoothly overhead, adding grandeur to every level. It wasn't just a single layer texture here, they actually combined layers to create these complex and beautiful cloud effects. It was seriously impressive. And everything you've seen thus far here has been captured on a real 3DFX Voodoo 2 graphics card running on a period-appropriate PC at 640 by 480 resolution. This was the 90s experience. The Voodoo 1 was also supported, of course, though with lower frame rates, but this is what you would get. But, as I said earlier, this game did not support Direct3D or OpenGL at launch, which left most players with one of two other options. So, the first one I want to mention, and probably the least common one, is support for the PowerVR-based PowerSGL API. When I first played Unreal, I was using a budget PowerVR-based Matrix M3D graphics card, one I still have in my retro PC today. And due to the card's limited blending modes, the visuals were drastically different. At the time I thought it looked amazing, but it turns out colors are muted, skies are somewhat blocky, and there's a lot of other weird artifacts. When I finally did upgrade to a 3DFX card back in the day and saw that Glide version, I was stunned. It really did feel like a different game entirely. It's really interesting to me how dramatically the colors are altered. Green grass takes on a completely different tint, influencing even the mountains in the distance. Lower resolution textures were deployed despite the card boasting the same amount of VRAM as the Voodoo 1. Things like lens flares here on this ship were completely altered and displayed as much smaller on-screen elements, while light maps are blended differently with the textures. Everything just looks blockier and chunkier. Looking at the iconic introductory flyby, so much of what gives Unreal its specific look is just kind of missing. That includes things like the volumetric fog and the lighting in the sky, of course. In retrospect, it's still nice that Epic supported PowerSGL, delivering a unique version of the game, but it's clear that so much of the game's visuals were designed specifically around the 3DFX Glide API. Still, for users of PowerVR cards, your Unreal experience would have differed from the norm back in 1998. But what if you owned neither card? Well, Epic had another option, software rendering. Now, if you recall, most of those early prototype builds of the game, and early screenshots for that matter, were all shown using the game's software renderer. While 3DFX did eventually become the focus, Epic never gave up on users without a Voodoo card. In fact, the software renderer in Unreal might just be one of the most advanced ever engineered in the PC space. With games like Quake 2, for instance, you gave up a lot when using software rendering. Everything became pixelated, colored light maps were gone, and color depth had to be reduced. With Unreal, however, Epic managed to replicate nearly everything seen in the Voodoo card, but in software. Leveraging MMX technology, Unreal's software mode features full 16-bit color visuals. It boasts a simplified but surprisingly effective form of texture filtering done in software. It offers all sorts of various color blending options necessary for the light maps and effects. Things like fog are there, lens flares are in, and largely it looks very similar to the 3D accelerated version. The main sacrifice comes from transparency, which is displayed with a Sega Saturn-like mesh pattern. Certain things also look a little off as a result, but honestly, the overall result is impressive. The main issue here is that it's extremely heavy. PCs from that era would struggle to reach smooth frame rates when targeting resolutions like 640 by 480, and PCs that could play it smoothly in software were more likely to have a Voodoo card anyways, so the audience seemed rather limited, but I'm glad it was implemented. In the year or so that followed, Epic would update the game multiple times, with support for things like OpenGL, Direct3D, and various bug fixes. The D3D and OpenGL support, by the way, was never really all that great, with missing or incorrect colors, but it was enough to get the game looking decent enough on non-3DFX graphics cards. 1 year later, developer Legend Entertainment, known more for role-playing games, would create an add-on pack known as Return to Na Pali, which attempted to integrate more story elements into the game with its own fresh set of stages to explore. Now, beyond the turn of the century, Unreal's legacy endured thanks to the old Unreal community. Developers continued enhancing the game with new renderers, texture packs, and features. It's still alive and thriving today. And in recent years, things like OpenGL were introduced, finally replacing many of the visual features that were previously exclusive to the Glide version. Interestingly, as an aside, a few years ago, Sega Saturn programming wizard XL2 even managed to recreate the first 2 levels of Unreal from scratch for the Sega Saturn. It's really interesting to see. This isn't actually the Unreal Engine, but honestly, they did a great job at replicating the look and feel of that game on way less capable hardware. The Saturn really has no business running a game like this, yet it works. There's also Unreal Redux, which has been in the works for years, a fan-made effort to revamp the entirety of Unreal's campaign. Development is ongoing, but they regularly release trailers like this, and it's looking pretty great. But just recently, in the year 2025, something I've been waiting for a very long time just dropped: Unreal RTX. Built on community efforts and NVIDIA's RTX Remix, this version of Unreal introduces a new renderer with path tracing and other modern features built on top of the DX9 renderer. But it's not plug-and-play magic. Materials need to be physically plausible to work well with ray tracing like this. Without a proper setup, it's not going to look very good. But that's precisely what they've done. Unreal RTX is an attempt to relight and retexture the entirety of Unreal with necessary changes to take advantage of Remix. The result, while sometimes uneven, is extremely interesting, and I've spent the last few days creating comparisons to showcase what has changed. So firstly, let's begin with the opening mission. There's some cool stuff going on right away. You might notice that all lights are now actual lights as opposed to baked textures. And to make that look especially cool, the author created a bunch of physically based textures to go along with it, leveraging techniques such as parallax occlusion mapping, giving them actual depth. The RTX version also takes advantage of volumetric lighting, which feels appropriate given the original experiments Epic did way back in 1998 with its little pockets of volume lighting. It looks rather different, of course, artistically speaking, but it's interesting. How well it works, though, does vary per scene, as we'll see shortly. One of the bigger changes here is that surfaces now reflect and refract light, so all those bright colored lights now play across the surface of metal in this area in a way that they originally did not. Given Epic's older tests with software-based specularity, however, it kind of feels like something they would have wanted to achieve had it actually been feasible in 1998 on a 3D card. In scenes like this, the original game simply mirrored its geometry to create the illusion of a reflective floor, by the way. But now that the floor actually reflects, it winds up looking rather interesting. Now, one benefit and or flaw to this mod is that lighting now behaves more realistically, so it's not always possible to recreate the exact same mood as the original game. Making this look great artistically is not an easy thing as a result, and that kind of helps explain some of the inconsistencies. I do love this scene though, with the rotating fans. In the original, they used textures to create the illusion of shadows sort of spinning here from the fans above, but in the RTX version we actually get real shadows plus volumetrics filling the space. Light can pour in from above. The rest of the ship then sort of follows suit, with a lot of high-intensity lights shining and reflecting across surfaces. It's tough to say that it always looks better, of course, but as someone that's played a lot of Unreal, it's neat to experience it through a fresh lens. So for the comparison then, I went ahead and continued playing up through the end of this level and waited to make my way into the great outdoors. And once we do so, that's where things start to get a little strange visually. There's a couple issues here. Firstly, the world geometry itself is unchanged and very simplistic by today's standards. When coupled with modern rendering features, it looks rather odd, especially the way specular lighting plays across the surface of the grass, not to mention the way it blends with the volumetrics. The addition of polygon grass blades and better trees does help to some degree, but I don't love it necessarily. Walking up to the cliffside and checking out the waterfall, I was pretty disappointed with how it looks in the RTX version, I must admit. However, it's important to note that you can actually tweak a lot of settings from the menu, which, at this junction, I decided to do, and managed to sort of tweak and dial in the settings to look a little better overall, and I kind of like my results here. To really dial it in then, I decided to skip around the game using the console, warping to different maps. And this kind of gives you a good idea of how the game scales visually across all the different environment types. The basic gist that I came away with is this: indoor spaces, both temples and futuristic alike, scale very well. The enhanced lighting, the parallax occlusion maps, volumetrics, and more all really boost atmosphere, and the results are often stunning. Different, yes, but it's fun to experience the game in this way. This stands for most of the game's environments, I will say. Yet some of the larger, well-lit outdoor scenes with huge flat surfaces definitely suffer. They don't play nicely with these new techniques, and it really highlights where the game is lacking visually. I also don't love the new sky textures they've made for this version. They're less complex than the original multi-layer skyboxes, and they just don't quite nail the vibe. There are some cool areas that really showcase the technology though. Any area that's bathed in strong lights from emissive surfaces, for instance, like the lava here, the glow of the lava actually floods the room with this deep reddish hue, something you only kinda get in the original with its baked light maps. Or in this underwater tunnel, every single green diode actually emits light in the RTX version, which fills the tunnel with this sort of greenish light, and I think it looks really cool. Plus, when you look up close on watery surfaces, you actually see that it sort of distorts realistically, similar to what we saw in Quake 2 RTX. There's also this ending segment here, which again has a lot of lights positioned throughout the tunnel. It looks pretty different from the original, but again, it's pretty neat to see. So there's basically a lot of different beautiful scenes all throughout the game in the RTX version. Some hold up very well, and arguably look better than the original. Others perhaps less so. But either way, it's a lot of fun to explore the game to see how it varies from scene to scene. One thing I did come to appreciate is how light behaves realistically thanks to the path tracer. There's some very dark areas, especially indoors, much darker than anything in the original version, which actually has the knock-on effect of making the torches and or flashlight a lot more useful. And when using them, you're treated to some beautiful shadows and lighting dancing all over the place, especially when you toss one into water. Combat 2, of course, becomes a dazzling display of lights and color, all casting shadows around the map as you take on your foes. It's beautiful stuff. It's a cool mod to play, and one I suggest checking out if you have the hardware. Just don't expect it to replace that vanilla experience. But regardless, I do think it's worth revisiting today, whether RTX or with vanilla graphics. Unreal is still an interesting game. Despite its now more dated visuals, there's still a sense of wonder to its vast locales with a brilliant use of color and lighting that's very different from games today. Even with, or perhaps because of, its simple geometry, the world just feels massive. A scale similar to what we would see later on in Bungie's original Halo, I might argue. One thing I haven't mentioned though is the sound. Unreal is greatly enhanced by the soundtrack, and it's something I want to highlight because, unlike many games of 1998, Unreal did not jump on the CD audio bandwagon or even use pre-recorded tracks. Instead, it leverages tracker music stored as mod files. This is the same approach that Epic MegaGames had deployed for most of its games up to that point. Epic Pinball, Jazz Jackrabbit, 7th Legion, and the like, they all seem to use tracker music. It definitely gives the game a unique soundscape, one that is unique and fantastic even today. Take a listen. All of this works in tandem to create something that remains worth checking out in my opinion. My main issue with Unreal at this point, looking back, is that the weapons never really felt as good as competing shooters at the time. Quake certainly has the edge here, so in that sense, Epic did not fully manage to match its software. Enemies just take too many hits, I feel. Their behavior though is interesting. After all, they did recruit Stephen Polge, the creator of the ReaperBots mod for Quake, to handle enemy AI, and their behavior is indeed more intelligent and interesting to observe than other games of the era. It's really just the feedback from shooting at them that's not great. But what makes Unreal stand out compared to the competition is what I would say the journey. So again, this is still pre-Half-Life by the way, but most shooters at this point basically worked by moving from level to level. You complete a self-contained stage, move to the next self-contained stage. Unreal technically follows this, but it creates a series of stages that feel more like a progression. Think about the flow of the game, for instance. You often find yourself in these wide open spaces, right? And these are generally followed up with what almost feels like a dungeon from something like Zelda. Now obviously it plays very differently, but conceptually it gives you a similar feeling. Like you're moving across these open plains here for a while, right? And then you stumble upon a castle. That castle itself then becomes a key part of the game. You actually have to figure out how to progress through it, and there's a bit of light puzzle solving along with the combat. At the end, there's a boss fight, and then you're able to continue out into this huge open trench area, and you'll see that there's a gigantic ship crashed at the end of the trench. That's your objective. So you make your way into the ship, and the ship itself becomes almost like this gigantic dungeon puzzle. You're throwing switches, you're rerouting power, you're basically figuring out how to open the way forward, right? Eventually, you make it out of the ship and wind up at its foot here in this small village. And this again becomes a bit of world building for the game, right? So you make your way through this wide open space, taking on monsters along the way, and then there's the Sunspire. This huge tower rests in the middle of a pool of lava. The pathways to reach it are vast and surprisingly narrow for combat. This feels like the journey, and then when you reach the Sunspire itself, that too becomes a large sort of puzzle that you need to figure out in order to proceed. And the game sort of works like this, where you're moving between these big open spaces, and then into the more tightly designed areas, and it all feels very seamless, like a continuous journey from one point to another, something that feels very different compared to other shooters of the era. This is specifically the thing that I believe makes Unreal so special even today. There's not even any dialogue or anything in here. You're just alone on this planet, exploring it, pulling things apart, and figuring out how to proceed. It's wonderful, which is why I still think it's worth revisiting today. But it also wasn't the end for the franchise, because obviously Unreal Tournament would follow in 1999, and that deathmatch style of play would soon become the focus of the series going forward. Now, there was a numbered sequel to Unreal made by Legend Entertainment known as Unreal 2: The Awakening, but Epic and Digital Extremes were basically separate from that one, and it feels very different. Epic itself did eventually shift over to making Gears of War as its main franchise, while the Unreal Engine itself became increasingly ubiquitous that generation. This is the point where Epic's fortunes changed dramatically and it became a gigantic company. There was an attempt to revive Unreal Tournament at one point, but it ultimately failed, and now Epic pretty much just specializes exclusively in Fortnite and Unreal Engine development, alas. That is to say, the original meaning of Unreal has largely been lost to time, and most gamers with an interest in tech will likely only really know it for the engine. But hopefully after watching this video, the next time you see that big stylized U, try not to forget its origins. Think back to a different time. Think back to Unreal.